Good afternoon and welcome to the Care Quality Commission's public board meeting of the 11th of March 2026. I am Sir Mike Richards, the current chair of CQC, but as many of you will know, I will be standing down soon. We are waiting for a new chair to be appointed, and just while I say that, can I hand over to you, Kay, because I think you know as much as anybody does about the next steps.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, just to update everyone, the appointment of the new chair is with the Department of Health and Social Care. We have been assured this is being progressed quickly, but we do not have a definitive time frame at the moment. If I may, Mike, I'll also do a similar update on the Chief Executive appointment. I'm sure people are interested in that as well. The approvals for the Chief Exec to start recruitment are not within our gift. This has been with the Department of Health and Social Care since December. The risk of starting recruitment without the required approvals has been considered by the CQC board, but we have concluded the penalties would be unaffordable. We are in weekly contact on these matters and we press the importance of resolution. Risk around organisation stability, leadership and ability to drive change are higher as a result. So just please everyone be assured we are doing what we can within the CQC board remit.
We have two apologies this afternoon. Aaron Chopra, our Interim Chief Executive Officer, and Alex Caffitz, one of our non-executive directors. And then, in place of them, we're very delighted that Chris Asher is going to stand in for Aaron. Chris is our interim Deputy Chief Executive, so welcome Chris to that role this afternoon. Absolutely right. Chris Badger is also not able to be with us, so that's another apology. Just saying that Richard Barker is with us, but is technically an associate non-executive director because he'd had to stand back from being a full non-executive director when he was working on the merger of NHS England and DHSC, but the full intention is that you will come back to being a full NED very, very soon. We are also joined today by Paul Kirby from the Gender Equality Network, just to let you know that Paul does have hearing loss problems, and so he's accompanied by two British Sign Language interpreters who are also in the room with us, and they're going to swap round every 20 minutes or so in terms of who's doing the sign languaging. And then, last but by no means least, the trade union rep today is Sue Seska, and she's from Unison. So I think that's in terms of the roll call for the day. Conflicts of interest, I haven't had any notified to me that are new from anything before. No, there's no new conflicts of interest, so we can move on to item 2, which is governance matters. First of those is for us to approve the minutes of the previous public board meeting. That was held some while ago. That was the 26th of November 2025, and so people have got their public board minutes available. First of all, are there any matters of factual accuracy? Suze.
Hi, I realise that me and Deirdre McAvoy trade this seat on a rotational basis, but I've looked at the notes and there's some inaccuracies with a number of these comments, and that might be a little bit picky, but we are very nuanced in the language we use, and some of that nuance wasn't captured, so it might be more beneficial in the future to submit our 3 questions or 3 statements after the fact, and I can send through the actual detail of that if that's helpful afterwards in the same today for our key points. Amazing. Thank you.
Any other comments on the minutes of the last meeting? So I think with that we can approve the minutes. Thank you very much. And that takes us on to the action log and agree with the proposed outcomes for each action. Are there any actions here that we need to be taking on board? I don't think there are, to be honest, because the ones we've got are complete.
Yeah.
Good. And that then takes us to the decisions log, which we are asked to note the decisions which were all taken actually back at the last meeting in 2025. Because this is the first meeting of 2026, there are no decisions recorded for this year so far. But were there any points there? We considered these earlier at a private board meeting. Is there anything here that people wanted to raise? No, I think that's good. We'll take those then as accurate. And that takes us on to item 3.1, which is the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. And there have actually been 3 meetings, I think, of that, the 5th of December, the 5th of February and the 24th of February 2026. Can I hand over to Kay as Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I will summarise the 3 meetings sort of thematically. There are six areas. First of all, the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee has been looking at the progress on our annual report and accounts from 24-25. There is continued delay to these, primarily due to the impairment work on technology assets. And recent discovery work has necessitated revisiting some of the valuations that were in train. Esther will touch on this more when we go to the executive report, and we'll report on the annual report at the next meeting. One of the disappointing knock-on effects of this, it means we are unlikely to get back into a more usual or timely annual report sign-off for year-end, for the 25-26 year-end. We're probably going to be in recovery for 2 years instead. A large amount of committee time has been spent on the refreshment of risk management and the strategic risks, with the board assurance framework coming twice to meetings in February. The latest version has also had been improved again. Other reports have shown that the number of strategic risks that are high risk and out of tolerance. So while the committee's commended the executive colleagues for honesty, it does lay out starkly how much of fundamentals need to be put in place to mitigate risk and provide assurance that CQC is on the right recovery track. And the shift to delivery at pace is absolutely front and centre of all the discussions. We are expecting to see over the next quarter development again, and putting in more assurance processes required for the transformation programme, given how critical and complex and necessary this programme is. In terms of internal audit, there has been some slippage, which is outside of CQC's control. Some of that has been in the technology assurance space, and we are pushing for a very fast start to Q1 again to have recovery there. There was one limited assurance report on programme and project management governance. Again, there's a theme here that's very, very important to where we are at the moment. The fieldwork was last year. We did receive the report in December, but not with the action plan. The action plan was received in February. It's been taken on board with a lot of the setup of the portfolio office. But with delivery being so paramount, we need to, and we will continue to look at this in terms of making sure that the lessons have been learned and are built into future programmes. We're very conscious of our assurance role for the teams and functions that CQC has within the CQC family. So we've had reports from Health Watch England, National Guardian's Office and the Maternity and Neonatal Safety Investigation Unit. Some really great understanding about risks, including transition risks in there, and where we might ensure that we are knitting together the sort of whole organisation in a more seamless way. Finally, we have a standing item now, which is, or standing items, which are very there because we're very keen to learn from incidents. So one is on counter fraud. And what we are seeing is it's reassuring that there's a much more proactive work to create an anti-fraud culture. Inevitably, when you do that, you see more cases coming to light. Those are being scrutinised very carefully, including looking at actions to tighten controls, and there were some very sort of clear signals in that. And finally, with freedom to speak up, we now have a report each time, including reporting on themes, so we can drive continuous improvement culture. Those reports continue to be evolved, but they're really, really important as part of our assurance. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Kay. But questions to Kay? Not seeing any. There you are. That's fine, in which case we can go on to item 3.2, our report from the Regulatory Governance Committee that was held on the 16th of January. And I chaired that meeting, and there were 5, I think, separate items that we covered. At that meeting, we got the initial response to our consultation on the assessment framework. I think we'll be saying more about that later in this meeting, but it was very encouraging that we've had a very large number of responses, I think over 1,700 responses to that consultation. But at that stage, back in January, we knew that further analysis needed to be done, which has now been done. And there was further work to be done on exactly for those complex trusts like hospitals and mental health trusts, how we rate locations and how we take that forward. And those things, it was already apparent from the consultation. There were more mixed results on that, and we are working through how best to do that now, and we will be going out to consultation again on that. And then the second key item that we discussed was registration, where people will know that there have been delays in registration, although very considerable improvements have been made, and getting the backlogs down. Part of that session was really hearing about the complexities of registration and what it actually involves, so that all board members or all RGC members were fully aware of that, which was a very useful session. We then had updates and reports from the 4 chief inspectors. We briefly touched on the maternity review, and again we may hear more about that and the next steps in that later in this meeting. And we also discussed the new regulatory powers which will be coming the way of CQC, things like cosmetic surgery and registration for temporary events. So the plan is that from the Regulatory Governance Committee, I will be standing down from that, obviously, and as soon as Richard Barker has been confirmed as being back to being a full NED, he will also take on the role of chairing RGC. Any questions to me on the Regulatory Governance Committee? No, in which case we can go on to item 3.3, which is the Executive Committee's report to the Board, and this is going to be taken by Chris Usher. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So we've broken the report down into 3 sections around our people, performance and external landscape. So just talking through the people section, first thing to talk about is our people survey. We've just closed our first people survey since 2024. We've had a really good response rate, 75% response rate, which is fantastic. Results are expected through April, so we'll eagerly await those. I think from the last survey, hopefully we can see positive changes being delivered. But I think we're probably realistic, there's still a lot of work to do, so we'll see those results as they come through. We've listed in the paper some key leadership appointments that we've made. or in the process of making, really strengthening our leadership, senior leadership cadre, with some key appointments there. I'll not list through all of those, but you can hopefully see really strengthening in our leadership space. Another bit to pull out is some work we are doing at the minute around modelling, so resource modelling across our frontline inspection directorates. This will really help us understand what our current capacity can deliver, also the quantifiable impact of the things that are slowing us down at the minute, and then provide us with a model that we can scenario plan around where we anticipate gains to come in through new technology, ways of working, and then the level of resource that we'll need once those are factored in to really address the demand that is placed on us as an organisation. The final bit to mention in this section is just around the CQC Way, which we launched last summer with a set of values and behaviours and commitments. We've underpinned that with 7 priority areas that each of the executive team have taken ownership for. We're making good progress delivering on this, but there is still some work to do in setting out a clear roadmap around those 7 areas, so we're tracking that closely. In terms of performance, we've been focusing on things that can make a difference now to help support colleagues and help support delivery. We've set up a multidisciplinary approach with a 12-week project to look at immediate changes. We've listed some of those out in Appendix A, as you can see. Alongside this, we're also looking at what we can explore with use of AI and what capability that can bring. Also testing things like shorter reports and that. Esther might want to say some more on some of these bits when I finish speaking. There's a bit to pull up. And then finally on this external landscape, a couple of bits to bring out there. National Maternity and Neonatal Investigation, so chaired by Baroness Amos, has published an interim report on insights gathered so far. I think that was quite clear that the system is not working for those it is there to provide care for. And Aaron, Tolly and Samaika are set to meet the investigation team as part of the next phase of evidence gathering. And we've also listed a lot of upcoming legislation, and you see there's a lot of activity working through there, primary legislation, secondary legislation and policy changes. Also, in addition to that, how we can support the shift to neighbourhood health as part of the 10-year plan. I think the key thing for us with all of that is just prioritisation, and there's a lot of activity there in amongst the work we're already doing, so how we prioritise that work is crucial. That was all I was planned to cover, Chair. I think Esther was going to say a bit on some of the work we're doing in the AI space as well.
Esther, over to you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chris. So just a couple of other updates for me to bring some of this to life. First of all, colleagues, I'd just like to formally thank Mohammed Imran Norgat, who has been providing interim leadership in the Director of Technology space. As the report shares, and as Chris has just updated, we have now appointed an external colleague to come and join us early in April. So that colleague's name is Sunny Singh. He'll be joining us in early April, but I just wanted to formally thank Mohammed Imran and also other colleagues within Mohammed Imran's team for their work in the interim leadership space, because it has been absolutely vital to our continued sustainability and success from an IT operational perspective. So just then bringing out some some additional points around the work, Chris, that you mentioned around tactical fixes. Colleagues will be aware, as well as anyone listening, that I made some personal commitments last year to improve things now for colleagues with the challenges that colleagues are still experiencing in using our regulatory platform. So over the last few months, the multidisciplinary team that Chris mentioned have reviewed over 3,500 requests for change that have been submitted to improve our current regulatory platform. That team have triaged and prioritised those down into 44, which we are working through. Some have already been delivered, and again, our papers provide more information on that. But that is a real kind of improvement as to where we were perhaps this time last year, and my hope is that those improvements will continue and colleagues will start feeling the benefit of those. Just in respect of AI then, again, the papers outline some work we are doing in the AI space, and all of this work will go on to inform our future rebuild programme.
A couple I wanted to bring out specifically, and again, my thanks to colleagues internally who have been actively participating and piloting this new technology. We are piloting a chatbot across our guidance, our many pieces of guidance for inspectors and operational colleagues on the ground. We are piloting a chatbot that we have developed to support the speed in answering our colleagues' questions, and early indications on that have been very positive, and we'll be including that in a formal valuation going forwards. The one I particularly wanted to mention was our work with ambient voice technology. So the board will be aware, as colleagues and others listening may well be aware, we were awarded some funding under the Regulatory Pioneer Fund to pilot the use of ambient voice technology whilst on site doing our inspections. And so we are piloting that in a project that is due to complete in May with a number of providers from our primary care, community care and hospitals and specialist care sectors. And again, that work will inform our future rebuild, and of course the necessary consents, as you would expect, are in place as part of that process. I also just wanted to mention the 250 colleagues that we have piloting additional co-pilot functionality. I'm very mindful, I often get asked questions about, is this going to continue? Please don't take this away. So for assurance to those colleagues, that is absolutely part of the work we are considering as an executive team this month, with a view to scaling and spreading that work across other areas and teams to make sure colleagues can be as productive as possible. So for internal colleagues listening, we have developed some comms around this. We will be developing more, and so that will be coming your way. But my thanks to everyone that has been involved in those pilots, including the providers that are helping us with ambient voice technology.
Thank you very much indeed, Esther. So now I think we can open this up to questions either to Chris Usher or to Esther. Mel.
So Chris, can I just ask about the relationship between the CQC way and the staff survey? So the CQC way, I recognise, is much broader about the way we conduct ourselves, the way we go about our business and build our relationships. But staff voice and colleague experience is a big bit of it. So how are we going to be using the staff survey to build that set of objectives?
I think that would be a good asset test of where we're at. I think the survey will tell us where we need to do more, where we're progressing well. I think we need to play those results in as part of the work we're doing around the CQC way. We've already started setting out a plan around how we address those 7 priority areas of the CQC way. As I say, I think that staff survey will just help validate that, and hopefully we're on the right track and we know the things that are coming out of the staff survey, but I think it'll be vitally important to test and also help us set some measures and metrics of how we can test improvement over time.
And we will, in due course, be bringing the results of the staff survey back to the board, which is really important. Any other? Suze, yes, please.
Thank you. Just one tiny minor comment is that my union colleagues would roast me if I didn't say it's the Employment Rights Act, as I keep saying bill, and have been corrected by every national officer. And so I just want to make sure that we're using the right language in this. And the second one was just on the CQC way. I think it is a pertinent time to have the staff survey results to see that acid test, or that test of where we've gotten to and where we need to focus more effort, energy. I think just to champion the voice of members that it's to see the detail behind the plan and the rebuild in our organisation, and especially the things that link to the way. As we approach the 1 year since the launch, it would be good to see some detail and some momentum around that, and some tangible what we have done and measurable successes or areas that are priority to ensure we're embedding this change, because the cultural change is very much needed and isn't always being felt, and so how do we sort of close that loop where we can? That's all. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments on the report we've heard from Chris? The ball is still in your court, though, Chris. We come on to item 4.1, rebuilding portfolio update. And I think we're also going to be joined by Fiona Dolman. Should be. So we'll just wait for Fiona to join us.
performance.
Yes, so I mean we could go straight on to item 4.2, the Q3 performance, finance and risk report, because that's still in your court, Chris, and then when Fiona joins us we'll go back to item 4.2.
Thank you. Happy to. So, colleagues, we have the Q3 performance report for you, as well as an update on risk and finance. So, just key bits to pull out from performance in Q3, starting with assessments. So, we set a target of 9,000 assessments by September 26. We've completed just over 4,500 to date, which is above the target we set at this point in time of 4,256. So we're also on track to hit the 9,000 target we set. I think it's fair to say it's something we probably need to be level-headed about. From where we've been as an organisation, this is real progress, steady improvement, and it's meeting the targets we set out. In terms of where we need to be and to meet demand, we need to hit higher levels, and that is what our change plan is around. That is the work that Fiona will talk to in a moment around. So. It is good progress so far. Within that, there's probably a varied position across sectors. So ASC, oral health are examples of sectors that are expected to meet targets. Other sectors, such as mental health, secondary to care, have been under target this year. We're seeing improvement, but we know there's work to do in those areas. CIs might want to mention more on that. Registration is another area to pull out. We track the volume of registration applications received that are over 10 weeks old. Overall, the volume is reducing, as is the volume over 10 weeks old. We've now got just over 1,800 applications over 10 weeks old. That's dropping at a rate of about 30% every quarter, so it is rapidly coming down. Our KPI is to clear and be at zero over 10 weeks old by the end of March, hence the red status for this. It's unlikely we'll do that, but that does probably miss the significant progress we've made in year around our registration volumes, which is a testimony to those teams. The other area I'd just like to pull out is information of concern. So just a reminder, information of concern is feedback we receive directly from staff, information about people's experience, or information from partner organisations. We get about 200,000 a year. We did a lot of work early in 2025 to really clear a backlog of cases. We've worked through that, and since then we've been trying to revert to a more business as usual way of working. In hindsight, that was probably ambitious, but it is vitally important work, so we're keen to set that out. We're starting to see performance head in the right direction. Priority 2, Priority 3, information of concern at hitting targets in December for the first time. Priority 1, Priority 2 is slowly moving in the right direction. We don't have, it's worth noting, sorry, we don't have an amber rating for Priority 1 or Priority 2. It's either red or green, just to note. Other positive bits of performance just to pull out would be so our performance in M&SI, contact and trust and families, noting the completing investigations metric is not always in our control, which is currently red. NCSC call lines have been steadily hitting targets all year, which wasn't always the case, and the work they've done this year has been fantastic in terms of operating the call lines. And our local authority assurance site visits, we've delivered all 153 site visits at end of December, which was our plan, and now just working through publication of those reports. In terms of risk, we're in the process of introducing and cementing a board assurance framework, and in the process reviewing our corporate risk register. Our risk register has 24 risks, with the majority being higher rated than we want. There's been a considerable amount of work since December, since this reporting period, working on our risks, and I think we'll see a revised update of that at the next report we bring through, but happy to take any questions on any of the risks we've got there. And finally, on our finance, at the end of Q3, we had a 2.2 million surplus with a 4.9 million underspend forecast for the year. Our depreciation is playing a pivotal role in our financial position this year, so of that underspend forecast, about 3.2 million of that is around depreciation, which is driven by impairments to our regulatory platform and also low capital spend. also had lower spend than planned in certain functions, notably technology, and a slight favourable variance on income. And the last point would be we've had minimal capital spend to date. Looking at plans for the year, but we're expecting about a 3.8 million underspend on our capital budget. And I will pause there, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris, for that. So open to questions. Bola.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair, and Chris. Just a voice over in terms of the performance report. I want to record my thanks to Chris Gendel, who is Director of National Ops and has also been covering primary care and community services for the Central Region. Chris oversees the oral health team, and you can see how their performance has more than held up, despite that expanded portfolio that he has covered for us. So I just wanted to draw the attention of board to that. And secondly is to say that the performance that we are seeing in primary care and community services, still some way to go. However, the progress we are seeing is a combination of a number of things. Performance recovery plans are now in place for each of our regions. We have a weekly director-led performance review, which is enabling us to see where the particular challenges are. In addition to that, we've also been looking at internal challenges in relation to specialist advisor capacity and capability, which has adversely impacted our productivity and performance. And we are also thinking about creative ways in relation to the utilization of SPAs, which we hope will give us even better productivity going forward. But just want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that colleagues are doing to try and make sure that we are doing the right thing by patients and service users. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bola. Any other questions on Chris's report? Yes, Paul.
Hope this works. Thank you, Chair. Chris, if I just have a response. The deaf man trying to control the microphone. Just a response to a couple of things on that paper which jumped at me is how confident are we given inspectors are retiring, and as we have still got significant numbers to recruit, onboard and induction, which takes time, because being an inspector to take a good year, 18 months to be a fully fledged inspectors. So what plans in place for that to progress that forward? And the second one is obviously the reason with the assessment being stuck. So what work is behind in unstuck that situation and moving that forward?
Handle those.
I'll try. So on the first one, Paul, we have live inspector campaigns on at the minute, and I think we'll probably need them, if they're not already, a rolling campaign of those campaigns. And in terms of, there was another point I've forgotten the second half of the question.
The one that says that,
sorry, yes.
Primary reason for stuck.
Yeah, no, sorry, it was your point about how long it takes to onboard colleagues. I think, yeah, I acknowledge that. I spent time with the group of inductees yesterday, so familiar with the time it takes, and I think we need to be mindful of that. That's probably also part of the issue in terms of the performance in certain sectors, the time it's taking to onboard colleagues to make sure they're fully ready and operational. But I think that the live inspector campaign is where we need to be on with, which I know is in place. In terms of the stuck assessments, I mean, Chris will probably talk that we're down to 2 now, which is the live position from 500, which is great. But in terms of how we got there, Chris can probably answer that.
I think there's 2 things to say. First of all, the original 500, we are down to 2, and those 2 organisations are, because the assessment itself was quite old, we're going back to do further assessments on those 2 organisations. In terms of what having that backlog taught us, we've now got a much more sophisticated set of KPIs that both director colleagues, deputy directors and actual operational inspectors can see where different reports are and why they are where they are. And we're much more able to hone in on areas where we need to put additional resource into support. Part of the reasons why reports continues to be somewhat delayed is making sure we can adequately go back on the FACAT comments that we get from organisations, and making sure ourselves that the report writing is a sufficient quality for it to go back out to organisations. So I think we've made an improvement in terms of the original 500, and we've got now KPIs agreed with each CI area, and more importantly, everybody can see where the issues are, and they can hone in and provide additional resource to support to make sure that reports that are stuck today don't stay stuck ad infinitum.
Thank you, Tolly.
Thank you, Chair. Just to update on performance for the hospital sector, as the report highlights, we have been consistently under target this year. We're very cognizant of that and have plans in place for improvement. We have a regular performance oversight and regulatory risk meeting chaired by our directors. We now have 2 of our substantive directors in post, and we're looking forward to our 3rd director coming in April. And since we've gone back into sectors, it's also been really helpful to have performance reports that we all have now at deputy director level, which allows them the oversight of that. And we have done a priority plan for 26-27. So scheduling now our scheduled planned inspection activity, allowing capacity for the unannounced that we'll need to do. And that will help get us back on track as well, because we recognise how important this is for patients and providers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolly. Suze.
Thanks. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask whether the switch in assessment targets is realistic based on the current headcount, acknowledging the vacancies that are reported in the papers for today, and just I assume there's a lot of technology action that's trying to improve the speed of our assessment process, and just so the question is, how are we translating those new tools and tips and efficiencies to the people on the front line who are so busy doing the job they often don't have time to read the materials that might make their job easier. So just going that balancing performance, the quantity of performance with the well-being of the people we're asking to go above and beyond and sometimes just do more. I think sometimes the message that has landed when the targets changes that we don't have any more people, so individuals just have to do more. So how do we, again, close that loop about giving them the tools they need and any new tools we have consistently and in a supportive way? So, thanks.
Chris.
I think just the first thing to say, Suze, would be the targets we've set factor in resource levels, so it's not with a full establishment. It factors in colleagues in post, and a lot of the vacancies we have, whilst we do have inspector vacancies, they're spread across the organisation. So just to give assurance, it's not setting targets based on aspirational levels of a resource. It is cognizant of what resource we have in place. I think Chris and Esther were going to come in as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. And so it's a really helpful question, and I suppose some of the conversations we are having with operational managers and our inspectors around the targets, it's more about actually why we have these targets. It's not the focus on targets, really. The focus is on understanding the experience of people in care and having those conversations with operational managers in terms of the conversations they're having with the people they manage in terms of thinking of people's well-being, thinking about actually what else can we do to mitigate some of the challenges we've got, for example, with the technology, like, Esther just said earlier on, when there are issues, they know exactly whom to go to have those conversations. Because what we are trying to do is not necessarily about meeting the target, it's about actually improving people's experiences and understanding people's experiences, and also the conversations we're having are more supportive and understanding as well the challenges that people are facing as we try and rebuild what we need to rebuild.
Yeah, thanks, Suze. So what we're trying to do is support colleagues now by making things safer and less challenging for them, whilst giving them the tools to improve how their processes work. And I suppose that the fixes that I talked about earlier, there's a lot of fixes in there that support colleagues from a health and wellbeing perspective, and we will be monitoring the impact on productivity and performance. But I won't suggest that that is the panacea to all of our kind of issues around processes and regulatory platform. They are improvements rather than fundamentally changing how we work, as we know. With respect to tools, just kind of linking this back to my previous comments, there are a number of colleagues that are using AI and additional functionality to support them, and we've got some particular activity in that space which is being supported by the Test and Learn team in adult social care. What we are looking at is then how we spread that across the organisation, and also from an educational perspective, how we support our inspectors and our operational colleagues to understand the tools that are available to them now that perhaps aren't being used well. So we have got some activity in that space that we are working on, and that will be coming through in the next couple of months.
Thanks, Esther. Sue, do you want to come back?
Yeah, just very briefly, thank you for the clarification, Chris Usher. I think just sort of acknowledging the context of my initial question really wasn't clear, is the previous targets were set on our current sort of establishment, and it's in areas where they haven't been achieved that I think that pinch is being felt. But thank you for the clarification. This will be very clear where it's come from. And the other one was to Esther as well, that I think the use of AI is really great, or has a great opportunity potentially, but I think I would exercise some caution to ensure that the information we are feeding it, based on if we are feeding it current inspection reports, that they are of good quality, so we're not building in problems in the system. I know that you're aware of this, I can see you nodding, but again, I would be remiss if I didn't pass on that little bit of concern from members about technology running away from us. And if we haven't got the foundations right, we're going to create more problems down the line. Thanks.
Just one thing to bridge your points, both points you've made, Suze, would be we've got new induction processes going live April, which hopefully create a better process for onboarding. I do think there is something we need to look at about when is an inspector kind of oven ready, for want of a better term, because the time having a new starter is not the same as having somebody ready to operate. And I think as part of the modelling work I talked about, we need to just consider that time frame and when someone's effective from, which I think probably does play in a bit in terms of some of the sector variances we're seeing where we're doing big recruitment drives. So just acknowledging that point.
Thank you, Chris. Richard.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just wondering if Chris or perhaps other colleagues can just elaborate a bit on the registration statistics. I mean, it looks all red in the report, but if you look beyond that, we're about 25% higher rate than this time last year, and we've effectively halved the number of registrations that are beyond 10 weeks. So I think that's probably a number really in terms of how well that's going compared to last year. But our target is to get to 0-10 weeks by the end of the year. That possibly looks a bit ambitious now, but perhaps we're going to make a big dive for the line. I just wonder if you've got any comment for that.
Yeah, it's absolutely, you're absolutely right, Richard. I think it is, with hindsight, it was probably an ambitious target, and we've been pure to that RAG status. So it's red. We've not got to where we need to be, but in doing so, we're doing ourselves a bit of a disservice with the significant reduction we've made, both in overall volume and the over 10 weeks old. So we've kept it as red just to stay pure to that, but that, I think it does. We have made significant progress in year. And we'll probably be just under 1,000, I think, by the end of the year. Not 750, somewhere 900, somewhere around that. But so, you know, I think it was about 4,000 at the start of the year. So it has really come down, and the rate it's coming down is kicking in. So it's good. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for those comments. And thank you, Chris, for leading us on that. But we'll now go back to item 4.1 and welcome to Fiona. This is the item on rebuilding the portfolio, an update on that. Are you going to kick off and then hand over to Fiona?
Well, I'm starting to get sick of the sound of my own voice, so I'll just pass straight to Fiona if that's all right to run through.
Of course. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Fiona Dolman. I'm the Interim Programme Director for our rebuilding portfolio. It's nice to meet you. So you've received the paper, but I thought what might be useful to do is just talk you through some of the key points in the paper. I'm very conscious that it's 4 months, probably 5 now, since the last public board. So just to bring everybody up to speed on where we are with our rebuilding portfolio, I thought would be a helpful thing to do. So we published our roadmap and we did a world tour, it felt like, in November throughout the country, taking that around our organisation and to key stakeholders as well. Shared that roadmap to demonstrate that we've got a view of the work that we need to undertake across the organisation to rebuild. Since then, we've set up our rebuilding portfolio, we've set up our programmes of work, and we've delivered a number of milestones, and I thought it would be useful just to talk you through some of that. We've set up our rebuilding portfolio with 3 critical programmes and with a very strong technical kind of structure and managing successful programme structure, which is like the government standard, very, very deliberately. We've made sure that we have oversight across the portfolio, that we're applying good programme governance and good portfolio governance. We're implementing project-level governance as well and getting all of that technical stuff in place so that the organisation can feel confident that we're managing risk well, that we're understanding our key milestones, and that we're making sure that we deliver on the recommendations from the DASH. I'm going to, Mike, forgive me, the Richards review, the other 2, the Care Providers Alliance review, and the Independent IT review, so that we can demonstrate a golden thread from those recommendations through to our deliverables, through to our outcomes. And we feel that's an incredibly important thing for us to do, both for provider and public confidence, as well as for confidence of colleagues across the organisation. We've established 3 programmes, and for each programme we've established an executive sponsor. Those programmes are Rebuilding Our Regulatory Services, and the exec sponsor is Tolly, and Tolly will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The focus of this programme is about strengthening our regulatory process from end to end, all the way through from registration to assessment to enforcement. Rebuilding Our Organisation is sponsored by Chris Usher, and this programme really focuses on aligning our organisation to support effective regulation. So we have the 4 chief inspectors. We need to make sure the rest of the organisation is aligned to serve those inspectors and their teams, because we're all here to support our front line at the end of the day. And then we have Rebuilding Our Digital Future, and Esther is the exec sponsor, and this focuses on building the digital and data capability that we need to make sure that we can support our work in the way that Esther's just described. So we felt it was really important that we learn from the transformation programmes that have been here before and have perhaps not been successful. So we are deliberately layering into our work that learning, and again demonstrating the learning from the previous transformations in the work that we do, so we can evidence we've addressed it. That feels like a really important thing for us to do. In December 2025, our private board approved the strategic outline case for the rebuilding portfolio. So that's a funding envelope of about £8 million to enable us to do the discovery work, to enable us to get to the outline business case, which then enables us to proceed into development and delivery. So that was a challenging piece of work, but really important to get us into governance. That's been approved, and so we're now working towards our OBCs and more detailed work. We've got really clear governance arrangements in place now. As I said, we've got executive sponsors. We have senior responsible officers. Again, this is all managing successful programmes kind of language, so forgive me. I appreciate it's a bit lingo-y, but it's really important that we do this. We've got SROs in place who are about to be appointed to enable us to have the right oversight, the right leadership, and to really be able to demonstrate that we are able to realise the benefits of the work that we're doing. We've got programme boards set up, and underneath those programme boards, where it's appropriate, we've got project boards set up as well. And we're providing, as I said, regular oversight of progress and risk and delivery. And the final thing that I would say that I think is really important is we've worked really hard to develop a comprehensive approach to co-design for the organisation, and to find one way of doing this for that organisation, whether we are in a transformation space or a business as usual space, rather than different approaches for different times. My team and Chris Day's team have worked really hard on this together. It's just going through all our governance at the moment to get it approved, and we will be looking to roll that out from April. The underlying principle of that is that we are able to be inclusive and hear the voices of colleagues across the organisation in a really representative way. So when we have different pieces of co-design work, we can draw in the right people with the right experience, the right expertise, as well as lived experience of the reality, so that we can make sure we are designing solutions that are fit for the organisation and fit for the future. So I thought it was really important to mention that piece. I will pause there, and I will hand over to Tolly, and then Chris, and then Esther for their brief updates on their programmes.
Fiona, just thank you very much before we hand over for all the work you're doing on this, but then let's go straight to Tolly.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Fiona, for the headlines. So the programme I'm going to speak to is rebuilding our regulatory services. As Fiona says, it runs end-to-end across all our process. But the main focus of the update today is around one of the 4 primary work streams. So there are 4 work streams within that programme, but the one that we're focusing on here is our future assessment frameworks. And I present this information on behalf of all 4 of our inspectorates, and with thanks to our policy colleagues who have done all the drafting on those assessment frameworks and had a lot of significant and very helpful feedback from operational teams. As you mentioned, Chair, when we were last at Public Board in November, we were part way through a public consultation, and it was a really gratifying response, and particular thanks to all the public, the stakeholders, providers, internal and external, who fed back to us and really influenced our thinking on this. The consultation looked at how we proposed to develop our frameworks and our guidance on assessment, and also how we should change our methods for inspecting and how we award ratings. And we also sought consultation during that around whether we should consider any changes or not to how we rate NHS trusts. So going through all that feedback, we had private board in February, and we agreed some proposals, which I'll specify here. So we have agreed to reintroduce sector-specific assessment frameworks, and that was hugely supported by the consultation. And we will go out again to consult now on 4 draft frameworks, 1 for each sector: adult social care, mental health, primary and community, and secondary and specialist care, the hospital sector. But we recognise that we may not end up with 4, we may end up with more than 4, depending on what this next phase of the consultation comes out with. Again, highly supported in the last consultation was the reintroduction of ratings characteristics. So what does good look like? What does outstanding look like? And so on. And there was also strong support for moving away from quality statements back to a supporting question format. So we're not returning exactly to the previous key lines of inquiry that we had before, but colleagues will recall how popular and well understood the Chloes were. We have agreed to remove scoring from the assessment methodology. It was well intentioned, but it did not improve the quality of our assessments and therefore did not drive improvements in care. So we will be removing scoring, and we will make our ratings judgments directly at the level of the key question level, key question, not beneath that, as we have done with our quality statements. So the next stage of the work will be the publication of the initial 4 draft frameworks for targeted consultation, and that is scheduled for the 24th of March. And that will offer further opportunities for engagement and feedback publicly and from our internal colleagues as well, who still have great ideas and thought to share. And that will cover not only the content of the frameworks, but also whether indeed the sector split that we've described is correct, or whether, for example, we should look at having separate frameworks for primary care and community care and so on. And then we will also publish a detailed response to that extensive consultation last year, and that will explain what has led us to the decisions we've made to date. So that's the main update from that programme. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tolly. Maybe just, are there any specific questions on that before we move on to Chris? No, I think all that seems clear. So, Chris, over to you.
So my programme that I'm executive sponsor for is around rebuilding our organisation. So this is really around making sure we've got the right ways of working in place to really support our regulatory focus. This will be predominantly around how our enabling functions, how our supporting functions are set up, and have clear ways of working. So the things that we'll be looking at really are roles and responsibilities clear and understood. Have we got teams or multiple places where the same work or similar work has been delivered, and is any of that unclear? Where we might need to do design work with some teams, and where we need to look at some external benchmarking to understand how our teams compare. We haven't really got far beyond just scoping at the minute, if I'm honest, so probably haven't got as lengthy update as Tolly went through there. We're still in the place of just scoping out what we need to look at, and what is a priority, what's an immediate priority, what are things we need to look at next, and what are things we need to look at later. So we've just been scoping around that, haven't got as far as making any decisions or present any options around that, and we've had one meeting as a programme board so far. So I think that work will start to ramp up, and it will be really important to make sure that colleague voice is included in that work as we bring that forward, and the co-design approach that Fiona set out will be crucial. So that's all I was going to cover at this stage.
Thanks very much indeed. Chris, will no doubt be hearing more about that in due course. So probably, unless there are any questions on that, should we go straight to you, Esther, to talk about building the digital future?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Fiona. So, colleagues and people listening will recall from our last public board meeting that we talked about an aligned portfolio plan, which Fiona's really helpfully spoken to today. So, as part of that, we set out our digital roadmap, which really focused on addressing the current pain points first, and that was for a very good reason. And again, just to set the context of that, our colleagues working with our inspection and assessment functionality are particularly impacted by the current challenges. And so we set out a roadmap to release new functionality in the assessment space from Q3 this year, swiftly followed by our registration functionality, and then on to our other areas of functionality in our digital systems. We aren't ignoring the other areas, colleagues, as you know, but we wanted to address the pain points first, and that supports our conversation earlier that we had around performance and supporting our challenges from an operational perspective. So, in terms of a progress update, you'll read our update in our papers, but again, just to bring that to life, we are in the first phase of our digital rebuild programme, which is effectively our discovery phase. We have the support of an interim IT supplier who is supporting us in that discovery work. The reason why we have an interim supplier is because we didn't want to delay work in the discovery space, because we have committed to doing this as quickly and as a high quality as possible. And I'll speak a little bit about our procurement approach in a moment around our wider kind of piece. But from an update perspective, our interim supplier and the discovery work is supporting us with 3 proof of concepts. Now, these are not prototypes for a rebuild. They are not in any way a finished product. What they are is proof of concepts to help us test whether we have our settings and our configuration and our approach right. So what we are doing is taking a complex use case from a registration perspective, a complex use case from an assessment perspective, and also working through from a data integration perspective how that all fits together. And those proof of concepts will give us a tested and kind of trialled and tested approach to our system configuration and our architectural approach as we go forwards. That work is progressing really well, and we'll be doing some show and tells on that work for internal colleagues at the right time, actually in the very near future. But that work is going really, really well. The second thing I wanted to raise was in our discovery approach, we have been reviewing and reaffirming, as I've just said, our settings and our configuration for our new rebuild. And as part of that, linked to the comments Kay made earlier from an audit committee perspective and Chris made in his finance update, we've effectively reaffirmed the need to rebuild our current systems using the platforms that we already have procured. So this is a really important decision that we are making. It needs to go through our formal governance, but effectively this is the the quickest and the best way of achieving a new digital functionality supporting our colleagues' work on the ground. And so that needs to be worked through from a financial perspective and an audit committee perspective, but that is the approach that will be recommended as part of the discovery. And then we also just need to be mindful, colleagues and board members, that accessibility and our adherence to government digital standards was a real challenge for us last time. So our support and our principles around adherence to standards, including accessibility, is a key part of the approach we are taking and is being reflected in the current proof of concept work. So then just on to our kind of wider work. We have released the invitation to tender for our strategic IT supplier. The window for clarification questions for suppliers to ask us questions has now closed, and we are progressing with the procurement process in line with our requirements as a public sector organisation, and also the process that we set out in our invitation to tender. One of the key pieces or evaluation criteria for any supplier will be fit with our values and our ways of working as an organisation, and that's really important considering the challenges we've had in the past. We expect to be able to award a contract to that supplier once we've gone through that procurement and evaluation process in June. And again, just for the board to note, all incumbent suppliers that we are currently using, including our interim supplier to help us with the discovery work, have all signed an ethical rules agreement, and safeguards are in place to ensure a fair and equitable procurement process. And then finally, just by way of an update, very happy to answer any questions after this, Chair. You may well recall one of Peter Gill's recommendations in his independent review of our IT was to seek external assurance on our design and build for our systems, and that is progressing. Our approach to that is being developed, and we'll be approving that through our normal governance route. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Esther, for that, and thank you to all our presenters of this item. But so it is open to questions either to Esther or back to anybody else, or to you, Fiona. No, it seems to be a quiet afternoon. So, oh, there is one. Sorry, yes, Suze.
I feel like I'm a chatty person, but I just wanted to say, Fiona, it's a pleasure to have you here, and it's great to hear that there's a focus on just demonstrating that we're doing things differently, because I think we very much are, and all this work is really positive. But I think for some people, there's still a nervousness that a small thing that looks like how we did it in the past is a sign that we are still doing that. So I think it's really clear to how we demonstrate that to staff that we're doing differently, and especially with a renewed focus on benefits realisation, because I think success measures are something that we didn't really have tightly in place before. And I am an analyst when I'm not uniing, so I am all about how do we measure it, show me the data, and yeah, that's how we really see where we're getting that value for money. So I think this is really good, just great work. Pleasure to have you join CQC.
Thank you for that. So I think that brings to an end that item on the agenda. I know, Bola, you have to leave at this point for an important engagement, so we'll let you go. But we will then move on. I think it is to item 4.3, which is the Quarter 2 and Quarter 3 People and Culture Report. And it's back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Chair. So the pack's included. I'll just run through some of the headlines covering off the key slides and then happy to take any comments or questions. So starting with the first page, just the overall metrics, we're seeing positive progress in representation of ethnic minority colleagues, disabled colleagues and colleagues from the LGBTQ plus community. Senior representation isn't where we want it to be for ethnic minority colleagues. It's dropped since the previous reporting period, 12 months before. And disabled representation, whilst improving, is still below active population statistics. So, acknowledging those areas, we've got work to do. Moving on to recruitment. It's really positive fulfilment rate, just over 91%, showing improvements in our hiring process. Diversity in roles offered is showing 22% for hiring of ethnic minority colleagues, 17% for hiring of disabled colleagues, 11% for hiring colleagues from LGBTQ plus community. I think, however, it's hard to see past the fall on that page of colleagues offered from ethnic minority backgrounds compared to the percentage of applicants. And that is a key conversation we've been having internally as part of our people committee. We need to look at the kind of the effectiveness of our interventions and track progress. This is over the last 12 months, so I'm hoping if we were to break this down, we'd show progress being made. But we need to keep a close eye on that one. Moving on to workforce, our vacancy rate is 10.5%, which is higher than target. The picture is a bit blended across the organisation. We've already touched on this in places. We've got significant vacancies in Esther's directorate, data and insight, for example, has had high attrition and a lot of hard to recruit roles, which is probably the outlier across our vacancies. We've also got a number of vacancies within ASC and Inspector, which is the point I was making before, but live campaigns underway for those. The remainder of the vacancies we're seeing are kind of blended across the organisation without any major outliers. And some of those vacancies and that vacancy rate is intentional. It is managing positions. We have, for example, within Health Watch and National Guardian's Office, which take up a chunk of vacancies. Absence is 3.9% compared to 4.8% previously, so tracking in a good place. Turnover, just jumping ahead a slide, is 7.5%, which is below 10% KPI, and again, steady decrease from previous years. And then moving back a slide, required learning. We've changed our approach this year, and we've moved to a quarterly delivery approach, so asking colleagues to tackle mandatory training on a quarterly basis. So 8 modules across the year. We've made steady improvement here. It's probably still not where we want it to be in terms of percentage of completion, but I think the approach of breaking that down is having a benefit from what we can see. And that was all I was going to cover, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris, for the lowdown of that report. I've got a couple of questions with the recruitment of successful managers. I know there's low of ethnic minority groups as well as disability. Is any work that the organisation can work with GEN and the racial equality to do a simple maybe a questionnaire on if you had a chance to go for the manager role or the senior role, what's stopping you, what's the barrier? And I think that's where we need to look for is there's loads of successful people in this organisation, but there's something that's stopping them, and we want to know what's stopping them to progress. So that's something maybe as an organisation we can explore from the other side instead of just open up the invitation to apply. What are the barriers? On the recruitment side, in experience working with colleagues across the organisation, I hear a lot of people apply to work for CQC, successfully got a job with CQC, but never really joined CQC about a year and 6 months in. So there's a gap in when they applied, accepted, and go on our induction programme. I'm wondering, that's great that go live, but how do we keep the process work with HR, getting people coming in? I mean, you might have 5. I appreciate some people might have 3 months notice, 6 months notice, a year notice, but I think I've come across so many people who've been waiting for a year to come on board to induction. It's a long time. So I'm wondering what can we do to speed that process up? And the last thing for me is apprenticeship, which obviously the government drive at the moment about apprenticeship. What we're doing at CQC to advertise some work of apprenticeship. It could be a 3-year apprenticeship, 5-year apprenticeship. I know we do have a graduate scheme for the other areas. I'm wondering where we can explore more about advertising for an apprenticeship role across CQC, because I don't normally see a recruitment page with a lot of apprentices roles in there. So I'm wondering that's something maybe we need to explore. That's my question for that one.
Over to you, Chris, on that lot.
Thanks, Paul. On the first bit around how we make opportunities for colleagues, I think there's probably a few things. I think we've got the Inclusive Leadership programme, which offers a real opportunity for colleagues, but I think it's probably more than that. And I've been doing quite a lot of work in my Directorate in Corporate Services, just thinking about how we open up opportunities and how do we really harness talent that we have, and how do we avoid the same people being picked for projects and the same people being taken forward. So I don't have an immediate quick answer for that, but I think it's definitely something that we are looking at and considering how we as I say, open up those opportunities for colleagues and think about how we harness talent and develop our colleagues. Can probably bring something back at a later date about that. Actually, that might probably be helpful to think about, and coupled with the other bit. I've heard the same stories about recruitment processes. I mean, some of this is notice periods that colleagues have got, as you say, and some of it is onboarding processes which aren't always in our control, the time it takes colleagues to get back, but generally there's a sentiment. I know Carla and the team have done a lot of work around recruitment. We've had an external review about recruitment processes, and it is also one of the things that we would be looking at in the CQC way in terms of our employee life cycle. So there's probably more we can do in that space as well, that we can showcase an update on. The last bit you mentioned, so the apprenticeships is an interesting one. I mean, the levy we've got access to, that we pay into, we probably pay in way more than we get benefit from, but that's very much about training and support apprenticeships rather than the salaries of apprenticeships, if you like. It is supporting colleagues through apprenticeships, but I think we can definitely open up more opportunities there. I don't think we're exploiting that as much as we can, but where we can, we have been bringing in apprentices. I know we've had a lot of work in, a lot of success, sorry, in Esther's space around graduate analysts, really making a difference. So I guess as part of our work I talked about before on the programme I'm leading on, it's probably a good point of consideration of where we could do more apprenticeships, Paul. It's helpful.
Esther, let's bring you in on that.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Chris and Paul. So just on the kind of apprenticeships piece, linking it with the piece that Chris called out around the vacancy rate. So colleagues who are not, who perhaps have my background or similar to in the NHS are used to a pay framework that allows incremental pay progression as you increase your experience and skills in certain areas. We don't have that in the CQC, and so the two reasons why we tend to have raised vacancy rates, specifically in highly technical skilled areas, are one, because exactly as Chris has just explained, we recruit colleagues in from apprenticeships or during that process. They gain experience with us, and we struggle then to pay industry standard rates. And so that's one reason why there is some high attrition. The second is from a difficulty in attracting external support to come and work with us, again because of our struggles to match industry pay. So we're doing some work, particularly in our technical digital and data space around whether we can adopt different frameworks to help us with this, and that's kind of a live conversation at present, and my thanks to Jackie, our Director of People, and her team for helping us with that. We haven't reached a conclusion on that, but we are working on that, because that also supports progression and attraction and retention, as well as kind of motivation. And from our perspective at the moment, we often have to fill established roles with contingent labour or effectively agency staff, because we can't fill them more permanently, which obviously has a cost implication for us. So that was my piece around that. I have got another question around the report, Mike. I'm very happy to hold it if you would like me to.
Go for it.
Thank you. So please forgive me, because I have raised this before. So I do think that we conflate, when we report on our people, we conflate sexual orientation with gender orientation. So if you look at our cover paper, we talk about the statistics reporting on our trans colleagues, but actually if you look at the actual report, it's based on sexual orientation and not gender orientation. So I do think we need to provide some clarity on that and consistency. My mind then goes to, where do we look at our kind of statistics from a transgender perspective, and how would I feel if I was one of our employees in that space? And so I just think we really need to bring some clarity into the lens that we look at this from. And Paul, I wonder if yourself and other chairs of staff networks can perhaps help us with this, about how we get this right. Thanks.
And nodding there from Paul, so thank you very much, Paul, for that, and thank you, Esther, for raising that important point. Suze.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't going to come in on the people pack. So there's a few things from this. It was really interesting to see. So the first off, I want to echo some comments from our Joint National Consultation Committee of one of our national officers. Acknowledge the shift in tone of discussions and how brave it is to openly and transparently highlight the potential inequalities in our recruitment process. I'm not trying to say there's causation there, but we know that from the Listening, Learning, Responding to Concerns independent review in 2023 that this was an area of focus for the organisation, and it is pleasant to see a shift in how that's being discussed and more transparent, just opening of, we don't have the answers, but that is a thing that we are keeping our eye on, rather than trying to put a positive spin on something. Well, that is an area of concern for the organisation. And the other parts of the report is that well-being is listed as one of the top 3 reasons for people leaving. And I just want to hark back to Dee McAvoy's comments at the last board session and the challenge around looking at how we are evaluating the well-being initiatives across the organisation and ensuring we're getting value for money and the impact on our colleagues, especially if that's contributing to what I would say is unavoidable leavers. That suggests that that people aren't feeling taken care of by their organisation. Now my last comment is around the gaps in the required learning. So I have, first off, a question as an eagle-eyed analyst, as that the number for the bullying harassment training, the overall total figure of completion is different to all of the other modules on that slide. So all the other modules have 3,604, and this one has 3,393, which, if the 3,604 is accurate, the percentage is quite far off and would bring it down to 82.9% rather than 88%, which makes it less healthy. So that's one point of clarification, if possible. And the second is just asking what we are doing to bridge that gap, because although the statistics and the percentages look positive, when we look at bullying and harassment, which is something that we have a zero tolerance approach for at CQC, there's still 401, but to my mind, over 400 individuals who haven't completed that. And so if those are people in leadership roles or with a sphere of influence, I think there's more of a cultural risk for that not being done. And I've been asked to, alongside that, not just what are we doing, how are we supporting individuals? So it's not just asking have they done it, are we giving people the space to really focus on this? Because I think that our cultural improvements will only be successful if we're bringing everyone along with us at the same pace. And having stragglers might be slowing down our progress in an area that we know is already slow to change. Thanks.
Thank you, Suze. If there are questions about numbers, we may not be able to answer them immediately, but at the same time, we ought probably to take those away and make sure we can reconcile the numbers wherever possible. Okay, I think that now takes us on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the Trade Union and Equality Networks updates. I think, Paul, you're going first on the Equality Networks. Just remind people, Paul is co-chair of the Gender Equality Network, but is actually going to be speaking here on behalf of all the equality networks.
Thank you, Chair. My background with the Equality Network, I was a DEN chair for 6 years previously, successfully working with the exec team as well as CQC. I stepped down to encourage new leaders to take the role. The reason I got involved with gender, and I realised that gender equality, especially the CQC, obviously there's more female in the organisation and a percentage low for a male situation. My task with the gender network is trying to get more male involvement. I've been involved in the menopause presentations, and I've learnt a lot because my mum had menopause, my wife gone through menopause, and a colleague of mine probably, so it's me to be educated what it's like to have menopause or going through pre-medical. The other thing is, recently we just had the cervical cancer, you know, understanding the impact of the drugs and everything else is like, wow, I'm educated by that. But there was only 2 males in that session. And the percentage of males in this, I'm trying to build a bridge because the male and female in our organisation could be supporting each other. So my task really is trying to get that education. I would like to put it to the board that some of the board members are male here. You know, I would like you to participate in some of the actual event to showcase sort of your profile and say that you're wanting to learn. And the other aspects of the men is obviously the high rate of men's suicide, and you know, the things that we're trying to encourage that openly. We have to. Chris White is one of the inspectors. So we work together and try to do the men's group, but we don't want too much of a men's group. We want to have a men's group, but we want to invite females in the group. And next week we're doing a misogyny session for the men to know what they hear about it, how we can stamp out in the organisation where there is misogyny happening, and that's kind of the work we're doing with the networks. It's great work with menopause, great work with other things else, but we're trying to bring the male and also non-binary as well, because they are part of the gender network as well. So that's kind of what's happening with our network. And one of the extra bit is the parenting thing. It's all about the maternity, you know, for example, if you have a adoption, you know, a parenting timing, a death during pregnancy, you know, the extension of that. So we're working closely with HR with a policy on the parenting. It's like carers, but at the same time it's about parents. So it could be both parents the same sex and things like that. So how we can support parents in the organisation with the policy. So that's the next step the Gender Network is working on. On the wider scope, we had the Black History Month in October. We've got the LGBT plus History Month, which has been successful, and we're in International Women's History, and you had that on Sunday, International Women's Day, so celebration for independent women in our organisation as well as outside our organisation. My plea for the board is it's very important for you to work with the network. Not only we have barriers of CQC, but we also have barriers outside of CQC. And to us, we always reach out to different communities, different networks, to get answers, get support. We are the users in the community. We attend hospitals, doctors, you know, no different to anybody else, although we might be a regulatory role. But come to us. There is that fear element where be careful what to say, what not to say. We're about psychological safety, safe space. You know, it's just good to have that openness and transparent, and not to be afraid to say it, because once you've been educated and you realise I've said the wrong thing, I should have made an assumption, you're learning from it. And I think that's a culture we're trying to invest in the network. Intersectionality, you know, people see me as a deaf person, no, but I'm also male, you know, also have a disability, also. So it's just thinking about different people that actually involved in different protected characteristics. And my involvement with the Equality Act, and if you remember, if you work in the industry of the NHS, you remember the Independent Advisory Group? They were involved, the people from the community, to set up the Equality Act 2010. After the Equality Act, we're not wanted anymore. You know, we've kind of done the policy and move on. Well, I want to bring that back, because we are the policy, we are the people, and we are here to make a difference. I've been here for 10 years, and I've seen a massive improvement over the years. Yes, there's some blips, but all organisations the same. But the access, Copilot, you know, sometimes I find it hard to interpret the language with English and BSL, but bullet points in Copilot, they give me a guidance. I get independent instead of relying on another source. So accessibility is increasing well. What I like to see more about is talent. There's so many disabled colleagues, ethnic minority, LGBT, they are talent, but the baggage of fear of historic is still carrying with them. So I think we need to work with those networks and say, how can we remove those barriers? And how can we make it accessible? For example, the recruitment drive, you know, the recruitment questions, they're all competent based. And if I be successful, I can talk the language. I talk how I talk, and I'm not going to flower it, because I want to say how I deliver. I don't want to say it and I can't deliver. And I think that's sometimes a barrier for some people with disabilities, and also ethnic minority groups don't want to progress or pressure. So I think, just giving you an overview, you need us as well as we need you. So the more you work with us, there are boundaries, of course. You've got your professional standards, you've got to maintain confidentiality, but I like to see more networking involved, especially with chief inspectors involved. I know some of you are sponsors, and Bolo is our sponsor for the Gen, and new inspectors, so hopefully we get that relationship going, so we feed back to you, share it with the board and feed that back. So you need us as well as we need you, and over the years of Equality Network, I've seen so many changes. I have seen so many landscape changes. I want to continue with that, because I've noticed a few years back it went back into the sort of pigeonhole. I need to get back into this. I think COVID played a big part of all these changes, and I think hopefully we go back. So that's all I want to say about the network. We're all working together, which is our Joyce Points Network meeting, which I couldn't attend, one's here. So we're trying to work together, have a project. And I did want to put on the table to have a year conference with all the chairs, with the chief inspectors and some of the board members, and see what business plan, what the drive forward, how can we change? Because if we can change the Equality Act here, imagine what we can do outside. You know, and I would like to have an internal independent advisory group from people from different areas, from Dementia UK, and what's going on in the landscape, and then feedback on what we can do to help out. And that works, but I know it's time, money, we've got different priorities, but we need to engage the community. And I hate the word when they say hard to reach. No, we need to reach. That's the people that we serve. But that's me done. Thank you.
Paul, thank you very much for that, and really for reminding us that we need each other, I think, in this. And just to remind people that because of Paul's deafness, he's got BSL interpreters working just the other side of the room. So are there any particular comments or questions people wanted to make back to Paul? Yes, Tolly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. I thought that was brilliant. And I had the great privilege last week of being invited by your network, Gender Equality Network, to talk about endometriosis, because my clinical background is gynaecology. There were some really inspiring colleagues on that call who shared their stories and their struggles with this long-term condition. And it really allowed other people on the call to share theirs. And you talking now has just struck me. I'm going to be really cheeky now because I haven't asked either of them. But when you were talking about, you know, for men, we do have the chair of the National Screening Committee, and what he doesn't know about prostate cancer isn't worth knowing, actually. He might perhaps come and talk. And our chief executive is a consultant psychiatrist who, again, will be hugely informed about the serious issue of suicide in men. So I just wonder if they might dip in. And you talked and then mentioned on the call last week about misogyny and a discussion on medical misogyny. I think it's important, actually, that women should be part of that, because women can be misogynist just as black and Asian and minority ethnic people can be racists. And sometimes women don't realise that we're being misogynist because we're women. So all the more reason to educate us on that one. But yeah, those are the great networks, and that's really struck me since coming to CQC, how strong the networks are. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Tolly, and thanks for arranging an invitation for me. Did notice that. But at that point, let's hand over to Suze, who's trade union representative for Unison, but actually here on behalf of all trade unions.
Thanks, Chair. I will say on behalf of the 5/6 trade unions, as we do work together as one almost informal collective, but it is key to know that we are individual, and some things we are very much within our own unions for things like closures or some of the more formal things. But I'm pleased to be here to represent 5/6 unions at CQC. So as usual, we would like to give 3 key messages. So that's our format. So this board session, I'd like to discuss employee life cycle. Our members are our members, and I will say our colleagues, because our members are employees of CQC, so it always feels a bit odd to just call them my members or our members. They're keen to see the detail underpinning the employee life cycle work stream or hexagon at the autumn event, as they're still feeding back a range of concerns around how it feels to work for CQC. This is especially felt or acute in temporary roles, as we understand why there's a business need for flexibility and for budgetary constraints and temporary roles to be in place.
So sorry, Suze. Could you please slow down?
Apologies.
Because I'm blinking fast.
If you manage to get Suze to slow down, you're doing very well. You're the only one that will be able to do it. So I think with thanks to Paul, we'll get Suze to slow down.
Anytime it's required, I'm just a northerner that speaks very fast. If you don't speak fast, you might not get it all out. So there are definitely some areas where we think that we could be doing better in terms of how it feels, or how colleagues feel they have been treated by the organisation. So this is around fixed-term contracts and secondments. And while people in those roles acknowledge the temporary nature of the role they've undertaken, what can we do to wrap around that to make them feel supported for the contribution they've given? And that is about giving better notice for changes to their contracts, about giving clear and consistent information rather than assurances informally that don't materialise formally, about ensuring that our sign-off for workforce controls are in line with contracts ending, so we're not creating a pinch point. I know there's been some recent changes to the induction programme, so I think that would be key to see how that is being, the efficacy and impact is being tracked and measured, as there's been a lot of feedback around inductions, and we want to ensure that we are setting our new colleagues up to do their best work at CQC and to hit the ground running when we feel they're able to do that. It's quite interesting from the papers to read that 48.4% of our leavers have less than 2 years of service. I know that when we've looked at recruitment data, we don't have a concern about being an attractive employer, but that figure does make me question how well are we able to retain the skills and experience that we are attracting to the organisation. Our second point is around culture. And while there are still reports from our members about hotspots of pure culture across the organisation, it is good to see that some of a change in that. There is some really good leaders demonstrating some very good behaviours, and some of the co-design work making people feel included. We're looking forward to seeing the staff survey results and working with leaders in different areas. As that Chris said, is a great sense of where we've moved the dial and where we need to renew our focus, but we would advise some caution around interpreting any of low scores as simply being due to change activity. The organisation's gone through a mass amount of change and will continue to go through change, and so I think that it's better for us to focus about how we manage change better rather than writing off people's experiences simply because of change. And to underpin that, I think clear and consistent communication is key to supporting our colleagues well through change, whilst enabling them to continue with their regulatory focus, as that balance is really key. And our last point is just a shout out to say that we will continue to work with the People and Culture Directorate around embedding the restorative just culture principles and the Freedom to Speak Up recommendations. And we are looking forward to embedding the changes from the Employee Rights Act. And we would just open up an invite to any leader across the organisation to get in touch with the trade unions to see how we can help with any change, whether it's we are engaged and consulted as part of formal change, but sometimes informal changes would really benefit from trade union input. We can often be an extra avenue of support, a point of clarification and information, and a feedback loop for leaders to hear where things maybe aren't going as smoothly as they planned, and to bridge that gap where people still are reporting that they don't feel safe to speak up or feel heard. There is, again, movement in that. I don't want to be negative, but whilst we still see hotspots, I think the unions have a key role in helping us to move the dial forward in a number of areas. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Suze. Kay.
Suze, I'll preface this. This is a slightly mean question, but we do ask the exec this all the time, so it's not just for you. Sometimes I feel the CQC at the moment it's a forest of spinning plates of all the things we need to do, and we are spending a lot of time talking about prioritisation, and so it does feel almost impossible sometimes as a board member. What's the one thing you would tell us to focus on?
I feel like that is a very challenging question.
It's the holy grail at the moment.
I think actually underpinning it all is listening to our people and being curious when we hear them. So not just hearing the words, but having that dialogue to say, and why is that important, and what does that mean? Because somebody speaking up and just saying, I heard you, that's often where people feel like they've hit a brick wall and they're not being engaged with by their organisation, or don't feel part of a change, or don't feel part of the changes that are to our regulatory focus. I know that a lot of the union input is often internal because we are supporting our internal colleagues, but a part of that is that our internal colleagues are really renewed on our public duty and us serving the public in that way, and some of the internal issues hamper them to just do their job, and some of the internal not being heard makes them feel that they're not being supported or put at their best to go out and be the ambassador for CQC, to have those professional conversations on inspections, to engage with providers. So let's all be more curious. If someone's speaking up, if they're coming to the unions and not coming to a leader, my first question is, why don't you feel able to go directly? Why am I required as an intermediary?
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for taking on that challenge that was thrown out at you. I think that brings this bit of the agenda to an end. That takes us to any other business. First of all, is there any other business from members around the table? If not, we then come on to the questions submitted by members of the public. One of our regulars, Robin Pike, has asked some questions. He's actually asked three, but I think we will have to defer one of them because it's really a question for Bola, who's had to leave. So the one about GP practices, can we make sure we bring that to the next meeting? But the first question was about mental health. So how do inspectors engage with patients in mental health clinics? And Chris Sakiti, can you tackle that one?
Thank you, Chair. And I think the best place to start is just a bit of a context in terms of our approach as CQC, which is underpinned by a constant principle on people's lived experience being part and parcel of our inspection process. So across mental health services, inspectors are expected to actively seek people's voice as part of the inspection methodology to assess where the services are safe, effective, caring, responsive, and well-led. So really engagement for us is therefore pinned on being planned, purposeful, and making sure we are including those voices in what we do. Just say maybe three ways we do that engagement is by direct conversations with patients during inspections. So our inspectors, when they visit services, they spend time actually speaking to patients, trying to understand patients' experience of care on a day-to-day basis, also whether they feel safe, they feel respected and listened to. And also, most importantly, do they feel involved in the care which is being delivered to them? The other way we also engage patients is through our Mental Health Act monitoring visits. So we've got people who go into services to speak to people who are detained under the Mental Health Act. And the part of that really is to understand people's experiences of being detained under the Mental Health Act, and also making sure that we understand whether people do understand their rights when they are detained under the Mental Health Act, and whether they are being given care and treatment that supports their journey to move from inpatient services into community services. And then the last thing we also do as part of us engaging with people in mental health services is looking at the complaints that come through to us from people who use services. And we also do some surveys, like, for example, the Community Mental Health Survey, where we ask patients to tell us about their experience of using mental health services. So those are the three areas we sort of do to actively engage people in mental health services.
Chris, thank you very much indeed for that. So we engage patients a lot, actually in all our sectors, but in mental health, that's a really good example of that. The second question that we want answered is to you, Tolly. When hospitals are inspected, how is the nature and quality of information provided to patients assessed?
Thank you, Chair. We assess the information provided to patients and service users under our responsive key question, and we have a specific quality statement headed Providing Information. Under that quality statement, we're looking to see that services are providing appropriate, accurate and up-to-date information in formats that are tailored to individual needs. And what we mean by that is including making reasonable adjustments for disabled people, providing interpreting and translation services for people who don't speak English as their first language, and for people who use British Sign Language. People who have difficulty with reading, writing, using digital services also need to be supported with accessible information. So in practice, that means the inspection team assessing a range of materials that are provided to patients depending on the service type, and that would include the inspector and possibly specialist advisors who are clinicians. There is a wider description to what I've given now on this quality statement, and that can be found on our website under the section Guidance and Regulation, and specifically around providing information. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolly. So I think that brings the business of this meeting to an end. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 3rd of June. And at that point, I just want to say thank you to everybody for today and indeed for everything else. Well, there is another point. Okay.
Mike, we couldn't let you go without saying, just in case this is your last public board meeting, as I said, it's not in our gift, but what is in our gift is to express our deep appreciation for everything you've done for the CQC. So, just review to chairing the organisation over the last year. We are very appreciative and be very clear that we will be taking on the torch of the Richards Review. You may still be taking on the torch next time, who knows, but if everything goes to plan, hopefully you'll be running pubs somewhere as well as all the other important things you do. But a big thank you on behalf of everybody for your service.
Yeah.